Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about the concept of scared straight. And here's what I mean by that, because normally you sort of would associate that term with, somebody who's in the criminal justice system. And the idea is that, eventually, you send them to jail, you send them to prison, they do enough time, and they're so sort of scared of going back to prison or jail that they stop, their criminal conduct, right? But I think when it comes to the behavioral health issues, it simply doesn't work. And I'm going to give you two examples of what I mean by that. The first is a family that we're working with, and an adult female who is in her mid-50s who has been using substances for about 30 years. And she, due to the sort of the mixture of different substances, recreational, prescription, that she's been using over and over again for all these years, led to her having a stroke. And she's in the hospital. She has done permanent damage to part of her brain. She's going to lose her memory. And it's a sad situation. She was in ICU for a little while on just a crazy scene. And the conversation with the family is about what to do. And I, during my conversation with the family, I said, look, she needs to go to treatment. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you don't get her into treatment, this is just going to continue. And they said, well, surely this event, having a stroke would have scared her. And I said, okay, I know this looks like your loved one. It sounds like her, but it's not your loved one. And they said, what do you mean? I said, are you, and I talked to them about the whole concept of the kidnapped brain, right, which I know I've talked about in other videos several times. But the idea is that when somebody is suffering, and they are suffering, right, and when their mind is being run by substance use, mental health, the behavioral health diseases, they cannot possibly see the forest for the trees, right? This, if you're a family who's got a loved one who's been sick for a long time, they're in complete denial. They really are. They're in complete and utter denial. They think there's nothing wrong with them. They will tell you they're going to go to treatment, and either they don't go or they go for a very brief period of time, or they negotiate with you and they're like, well, we'll go to outpatient treatment when they should be doing, 3 to 6 months in a residential program. They're going to negotiate with you. And that's because their mind is so controlled by this disease that they can't possibly make the decision to save themselves, right? How can they? And so I think the family said to us, well, this should scare her into going to treatment. And I said, it's not going to do that. And it's not because she's a bad person or she doesn't love you. It's because her brain's been kidnapped. She has a disease and she can't possibly save herself, right? She's just damaged a major part of her brain, and yet she doesn't want to go to treatment. Think about that. How insane is that, right? It sounds insane, but it's part of the disease. And I said, you're going to have to make the decision to get her into treatment. Now, she's probably going to have to do a little bit of rehab, so, to start getting some of that damaged brain working again. And I'm not a doctor here, so I can't really explain the medical side of things, but she's going to need some rehab, and then she's going to have to address this behavioral health issue. It has to be dealt with, or this is going to continue, right? It has done for 30 years. And there's been little to no treatment, and what has been done is minimal. And she walked out. So you can't scare somebody to do this stuff. Now, the other example is, again, we had a call from a potential client, and there was a young lady, late teens, who had been using some very serious street drugs for about 8 or 9 years, and she was starting to do crazy things like, prostitute herself and post provocative photographs on social media. And the family said to us, I want you to lock her up, put her in a locked facility, and scare scare her straight, scare her into staying in treatment and going to treatment. And I said, you don't understand. I said, first of all, she has a disease. I said, but she's relatively young compared to some of the other individuals that we put in treatment. I said, something has happened here, right? Something has triggered this behavior. I said, I don't know if there was some physical or sexual abuse, but there's been some trauma in all likelihood. Something has triggered this because this young lady comes from a very well-to-do family. She's got a couple of siblings who are, by all accounts, productive members of the community. And yet she's having such issues. Her behavior is becoming more outlandish, more wild, and frankly, more dangerous in many ways. And I said, you cannot scare her into going into treatment. You're going to have to make the decision for her. She can't do it. Somebody has to step in and save her before something tragic happens. And obviously, if she's prostituting herself, that in and of itself is a recipe for disaster. So, the sum and substance of this video is that you cannot scare somebody into going to treatment. You cannot negotiate with them. You cannot make them see the light. It just doesn't work. You have to make the decision for them, okay? And eventually the light bulb will go off. It typically does somewhere between the 3 to 6 month range, but from me putting out some of these other videos, it's a year-long program if you come to work with us. Again, you don't have to hire us for a year, but you got to think a year down the road. And I want you to think about a time when your loved one was not like this, right? When they weren't acting wild and crazy and the behavior was not just utterly insane. And I want you to take that image and I want you to stick it right here and focus on that, because that is where we want to go with you. But it's going to take time. It's going to take a year before they can experience recovery and develop the skill set to be able to maintain it for the rest of their life. It just takes time. But you have to make the decision for them. They can't do it. So I wanted to share that with you. I thought it was an interesting topic to discuss with you. And that's it. That's all I have to say to you in this video, but I would love a thumbs up. I would appreciate any comments, questions, and a subscription to the channel would always help. So thanks for tuning in. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.